Okay, go ahead and try again.
Welcome to Virtual School Assembly. Today weeks.
2 weeks. Yeah. Okay. Today's guest.
Today's guest is Tyler Christensen. He is my dad, and and he runs and loves pizza, and he works on projects in the yard and things inside. It's really great. Tyler.
That was so awesome. All right, thank you. All right, so in this episode of Virtual School Assembly, we're going to do things a little different. We're going to turn the tables, and rather than me being the host for this episode, I'm going to be the guest. And I'm bringing back on a previous guest from this first season to be the host and to ask me questions about my life and what my story and what message do I have to share. So a bunch of them were asking me if I would do an episode like this, and I thought, let's go ahead and run one here as the season winds down. So we'll have, for this episode, questions about me, and then the next episode, I'll tell you what I've been doing during the pandemic and how Virtual School Assembly came to be and some of the plans moving forward. I can just tell you, we've already filmed like 20 episodes for season 2, so that's definitely coming in August of 2020 as the new school year starts. And we have some superstars coming in. We have actors, directors, Olympians, Ninja Warriors, professional football, baseball, basketball, hockey, rugby players, mountaineers, surfers, all sorts of cool guests, as well as professional speakers, educators. And so we've got a full lineup scheduled for fall 2020. If you haven't done so already, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you can be notified when we start back up in August, and so that you won't miss any episodes. We've got some great guests coming. But for now, we have some previous guests here to ask me some questions. So let me welcome the first host to the show. All right, our next guest, or our next host, I guess it is, on Virtual School Assembly is Katie Nall. Katie was in on episode 15 where she talked about emotional freedom technique, a strategy that she has worked with people in reducing anxiety and stress and having more clarity in their lives. And so we talked about that way back in episode 15, but she's going to be our host today. So let me hand you the microphone, Katie, and the show is yours.
Thank you, Tyler. So I am so excited to be part of this amazing podcast that you're starting. And I have a lot of questions. We'll talk a little bit about tapping and EFT later on. But first of all, how in the world did you get this idea, and how are you doing these podcasts?
Yeah, so the idea just really grew out of my own need as a teacher. As we started going home from learning from home and sending our students to learn from home, it was hard for me not to be with my students. But even when we're in school, when students are stressed out and when they need a release from their anxiety and stress, often we'll have school assemblies and we'll go down, we'll hear an inspirational speaker, or we'll do something active. Maybe we'll go to an extra recess or gym or something. And from virtually, we couldn't do any of that. And so I started thinking, what can I do to support my students at home, and especially in the area of mental and physical health? So as I was thinking about that, one of our other speakers on the show, his name's David Rendall, and he started a YouTube series called Bed Talks, where you just roll out of bed and put an inspirational message forward. And it was growing pretty quickly at the time. And I asked him about that, and he gave me some details on why he did Bed Talks. And I thought, I could do something like this, but for my students, have some sort of virtual assembly. And so the idea kind of was half-baked, and I just decided to take action on it and move forward. And it has grown and evolved with time. What it looks like now is very different from what it looked like 2 months ago. But I did it mostly to service my students. So that's where the idea came from. All right, so welcome back. Our next guest is Carolyn Morris. You might remember Carolyn from episode 34, where she talked about life harmonies and the myth of work-life balance. She shares some awesome strategies in that session about how to improve your communication. So we're grateful to have Carolyn back on the show. And I guess, Carolyn, it's your show, so I'll turn the time over to you.
I love it. Tyler, I am so intrigued to know how you've been able to calibrate. Like, how have you adapted your life to incorporate some of these work-life harmonies? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, well, one of the things that you talked about is that we don't necessarily need to have a balance in our life. There's a time and a season for everything. And right now during this pandemic, that means people have had to pivot. They've had to change things. And my life has been no different. At the beginning, when I started virtual school assemblies, I was still teaching full time. And so what that meant for me was I had to wake up a little earlier. So I was waking up between 4 and 4:30, working on virtual school assembly, then helping my own students for a few hours, then helping my children with their schooling, helping my students again, and then working virtual school assemblies in the evening. And so it was a really busy, hectic time for me, but also super rewarding because I was doing something very in line with my life mission. And so, finding those life harmonies, even being really, really super busy, was an easy thing during that time because I felt like I had a purpose. Now, as we've gone into the summertime and I'm not spending so much time at work, I'm still going to work once or twice a week and filming videos for my students for next fall because we don't know what next fall will look like. So I'm still doing a little bit of that and preparing for the fall, but I've spent a lot more time with virtual school assembly. And for me, it's been finding the processes that work, reaching out to people in different ways. I'm still hustling, I still want to have the best guests possible for the show, and I'm still doing outreach. I'm probably contacting 200-300 people a day, just with soft contacts, connecting on LinkedIn and social media and stuff like that, and then sending maybe 20 to 30 actual messages to people each day, seeing what their interest on the show is and stuff like that. So it's been a lot of work. But it's work that I can do from home. And so I love being home. I love spending the time with my kids. And that's what's really kept me centered through all this is I'm still going on walks once or twice a day with my wife. I'm going jogging with my son who started cross country now. I never thought he'd do running. He hates running, but his social group is into it. And so I have another runner in the family. So that's been wonderful. And so I'm finding time for me and for my family, but I'm also keeping my long-term goals in check. And so I'm still working on improving as a teacher. I'm still working on this brand with virtual school assembly because I think it's going to do a lot of good in the world. So keep them busy.
That makes a world of difference. World of difference. How have you been able to create boundaries, healthy boundaries around your work life, VSA, and home life? What does that look like? How have you been able to do that?
I think the biggest thing is having really open communication with my wife and my children, especially because right now the scheduling is constantly in flux. As I have interviews onto the show, it does interfere with our family life because it's during the day. Here I am in the basement. I'm in the theater room. So none of our kids are watching movies today, and they don't do any media in the morning anyways. And so that's not a big adjustment. But we've had to be on the same page. And so we're constantly going over schedules, seeing when we're available. And then when there's a break, we take advantage of that. So right before I hopped on with you, I had a 10-minute break from my last interview. So I ran upstairs, I checked in with the kids. I said, who wants to jump on the trampoline with me? We head to the back for 5 minutes, jumped on the trampoline. I said goodbye, and I'm back down here in the dungeon, right? And so they know what to expect from me. And that makes it so much easier to say, okay, I now have an opening, or maybe I don't, and I have to work really hard. Yesterday, I took my older son, he's 14, and we hadn't celebrated any of his end of the year stuff because he didn't have a final concert for band. He didn't have a final party for his class. And so we've been taking each of the children on dates. And so last night I had an opening for a couple hours. So I took him, we went shopping together, then we went to Applebee's and he got dessert, and it was just father-son time, and we're making time for those kinds of things. And so communication first, making sure that's open, and then making time for the things that matter most. All right, our next guest is Khalil Sikander. Khalil is a basketball coach and a teacher, and he talked way back in episode 8 about building dignity. We're excited to have you back on the show, Khalil, today. I guess we're excited to have you on the show. I'm the one coming back since you're the host.
That's right, yeah.
So I'll give
I'm glad to have you.
Hey, it's good to be here.
I know you did an episode with your wife, which was amazing. I thought that was pretty cool that you were involved in this virtual assembly, and I want to know, as a school teacher, I think it's very difficult for us as school teachers to have a balance in our lives, right? Especially during this COVID time when we were stuck in the home, a lot of crazy things going on. I mean, now we have this, Black Lives Matter movement and all this stuff.
Mhm.
How do you find balance with all of this going on as a school teacher, as a dad, as a husband? Talk about what it takes to have all of this going on in your life, because it sounds like you're a writer, you're an author, you speak, you're a teacher. Tell me about the balance. How do you balance all of that in your life to make it all work?
Sure. I spoke a little bit with Carolyn Morris on another segment about the idea of work-life balance, and I believe there is no such thing as balance. There are different
Yeah.
times and seasons for things, but the important thing is finding something that works. Carolyn calls it life harmonies, and I think the way that works for me is I need to put my motto in life is a three-parter. It's work hard, do good, be nice to your mom. And the be nice to your mom is the most important part, because what I mean by that is if you're working hard and if you're doing good things and putting good out to the world, that's going to make you feel really good, and it's going to give you a lot of satisfaction and joy in your life. But the most important thing in your life are the relationships, and in particular, the relationships with the people who are and should be closest to you. So whether for my students, that's going to be their mom and their dad. For me, that's my wife and my children. So if I make them priority number one in my life, and if I'm regularly communicating with them, spending time with them, then the other things seem to fall into place. An example of that would be today. I just had a meeting with I just went up and talked to my students, my children. Geez, I'm getting all confused here. So I go upstairs. I just had finished an interview, and I was talking to my three older kids. And I said, look, guys, for us to meet our family goals this year, I don't have enough time with recording all these episodes and doing all the other things to support Virtual School Assembly, as well as preparing for my teaching for the fall. I just don't have enough time. So I have a proposal for you. And my proposal was I would hire them as interns to go through all the videos, to take notes and write up show notes, similar to what I've done on the YouTube description, but to pull out the best quotable lines and things like that, to give proposed titles for the talks and things like that. And then I would pay them for their notes, because then I can use those to put together to have a blog article for each episode, right? So I want to have a page on the website for each episode. And if they do all the grunt work for me, that's going to free up my time so that I can work on other things so that we have more time as a family. Well, they were on board, because then they get to watch the Virtual School Assembly, something they're doing anyways, just take notes on it and make it useful to me. And as interns, I'll pay them a meager wage, so they'll be able to earn some money towards their goals. But all it took was me having an idea, involving my family in that idea, and then we move forward. And so, I don't have great balance in my life, but I have wonderful relationships, and I have a supportive wife and supportive kids because we work together. And I think that's really been the key. So our guest right now is Steve D'Onofrio. He came in on episode, one of the earlier ones. Do you remember what number you are, Steve?
I do not.
It's like 15, around there. And he talked about getting real with your dreams and practicing proactive positivity. And so now we're turning the tables, and he gets to ask me a few questions. So welcome back to the show, Steve.
Thank you, Tyler. Hey, I was really excited to hear some of your story. And after we were done, we told the story of Norman Vaughn and his big dream to climb a mountain.
Mm-hmm.
You had a big dream too.
Yeah.
And tell me a little bit about what your big dream was and how that came to be.
Yeah, you're referring to my weight loss?
Yep.
Okay. So I've been active all my life. I'm a runner, but I've also been fat all my life. And it wasn't because I wasn't trying. I was trying to be active. I've always eaten pretty healthy. I mean, compared to what a lot of other people do, I've had a pretty healthy lifestyle. The problem was that I just loved to eat all the time. And so I was just a few years ago, I was over 300 pounds, morbidly obese. And my wife sat me down and she said, something needs to change. She had like an intervention, right? And she sat me down and said, this is making me nervous for our kids. You know, I want you to be around for a really long time. And so I made some decisions at that point to really dig in and put in a greater effort than I had in the past. And so I did. And over the next few months, I tried a lot of things out and I worked really hard and I gained 10 more pounds. And I was so frustrated, it just wasn't working. And then the new year came, and like all good New Year's fat people, I set the resolution to lose weight, and I set this hugely ambitious goal to lose 40 pounds. That would have taken me from morbidly obese to, which now I knew what that was because I'd started doing research. I would have gone from morbidly obese to just overweight. So I would have barely squeezed past the obesity level if I'd lost 40 pounds. And so I didn't honestly think I could do it because I'd never lost 5 pounds in a year before. But I knew I had my wife's support, my kids were on board, and I started telling everyone else. I told my students, I'm going to lose weight this year. I told my colleagues, I'm going to lose weight this year. So I'd have some of that accountability. And then I started trying even harder. And over the next few months, I actually gained a few more pounds. So my weight kept going up instead of down. But during that time, I was changing my mindset. I was learning what was working and what was not working. So then when the summer hit, and as a school teacher, I have a little more flexibility with my time. Then I went out running that first day of summer, couldn't make it a mile without stopping, but was excited at the prospect. And so the next day I got out again and I ran a little further. And the next day I got out and I ran a little further. And pretty soon the weight did start coming off. And like anyone who's losing weight, those first few weeks, you're going to lose a lot of weight, and then most people rebound and put it back on. But because I had learned what worked for my body and what didn't work for my body, I'd made some commitments. I said, this summer, I'm absolutely not having added sugar. I'm absolutely staying away from processed food. That not only did it come off quickly at the beginning, but then it kept coming off. And it wasn't like this unhealthy thing where I lost a ton of water weight and was dehydrated and it was being unhealthy. The opposite was true. In fact, over the year that followed, I went from 44% of water weight in my body to 60% water weight. So I actually had like an additional 30 pounds of water in me a year later, but I lost 100 pounds. And it just was consistency. It was just every day getting out, hitting the trail. I started doing some strength training, which I'd never done before, going to the gym, my home gym. I still hate gyms. But I started doing that. I was more intentional in what I ate. I gave up sugared beverages. I started liking foods that were healthy. And for me, that was the biggest thing is I didn't drink water and I didn't eat salads because they were disgusting. But once I got crap out of my body, so it took a few weeks and I had hunger pains and cravings, really insane at the beginning of the summer. But within a few weeks, I'd purged my body of all the crap. And so then I wasn't craving bad things anymore. And as I started eating healthier things, they started tasting better. And so my diet changed, and those things have persisted. Now here we are 2 years later. And last year I actually gained 30 pounds, but I ran the numbers and I had lost 5 pounds of fat, but had gained 30 pounds of muscle. And so I'm healthier now than I was a year ago, but I weigh more. And so I think a lot of people get hung up on the scale that I have to lose 50 pounds, I have to lose 20 pounds or whatever. But body fat percentage for me has been a much better indicator. And so I went from 40% body fat down to 22% body fat. And then last year I got down to 18%. And my goal for this summer is I'm trying to get much healthier even now. So I'm going to try to get down to 12. So
Wow.
So that was the journey. You asked about running earlier, and that was just a natural. As I was getting in better shape, I was like, oh, now I'm capable of, my 15-minute mile is now a 14-minute mile, and then a 13-minute mile. And after I ran a marathon, the marathon went a lot better than I expected. I finished in under 5 hours, which for someone coming off being 300 pounds a few months before was really, really good. So I said, well, I need to keep setting goals or I'm going to fall back into my old ways. And so I set a goal to run a double marathon, so twice as far. And so I just set the goal to do that. And last summer I trained for that. And I was running a lot. I was running 50, 60, 70 miles a week. I put in almost 1,000 miles over the course of the summer. And then in September, I ran a race that was this ultra marathon. It was all night long. We started at 7 p.m. and I ran through the night. My son ran the first leg with me. The first leg was 6 miles, and he hates running, but he wanted to support me. And then my family all went home and went to bed, and I kept running. And then back in the morning, they came back to see me finish. And it was a great experience. I don't know if I'll ever do that again. It took a toll on my body. That's just a lot of miles. But it was great. You know, you talked about getting real with our dreams and setting really big, ambitious dreams. That's what I wanted to do. And so I still have other physical goals that I'm working towards now. But I'm not looking at mass volume anymore. I'm looking at improving my speed and stuff like that. So it's been fun. I mean, I just got home from an 8-mile run this morning, and it felt great. So
now, what do you think about folks that they got to get it done fast right now?
Mm-hmm.
You think that's a healthy way to go about this? One of our principles in getting real with your dreams is about lifestyle matching your goals and your dreams.
Yeah.
Is this something we can quickly fix, or should we look at more of a process? And what's your advice to people about this roller coaster kind of?
Yeah. Now, my answer might surprise you a little bit, because my answer would be both. I think having a quick win is important psychologically. And so if you can lose 2 or 3 pounds in a week, I mean, long term, that's not going to be healthy. You don't want to be losing 4 or 5 pounds in a week, because that means you probably are losing water weight. You're getting dehydrated. You're losing a lot of muscle. If you're losing more than 1, maybe 1.5 pounds in a week, you're losing things you don't want to be losing. And so, but in the beginning, when I first started my weight loss journey, and I lost like 5 pounds that first week, 4 pounds the second week, psychologically, that did a lot to say, you're on track, you're doing the right kinds of things. And so I think having a great result immediately can be really helpful psychologically to move you along. Now, chances are, after 2 or 3 weeks of big losses, you're going to gain 5 pounds in a week. Your body's going to respond, and you're going to have a setback. And so if you plan for setbacks and say, I'm going to stay the course for this set period of time, even if things don't work the way I think they're going to, then you're right. The process is what matters the most. And so if you have a good plan, if you've done your preparation, then when the setbacks come, you can weather the storms and get through them okay. So our next guest here on Virtual School Assembly, our next host, I should say, is Janice Litvin. She made her first appearance in episode 9, where she talked about preparing for a world of change, and talked about her experiences as a recruiter and preparing students for college and professions that come beyond. Offered a lot of value in that episode, so you'll want to check that back out in the archives. But I'm going to hand the microphone over to Janice now, since she's the host of this segment. So here you go, Janice.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Tyler. I'm so happy to be back. So I was very interested. One of the things I learned about you from this process of podcasting together is that you wrote a book called Unlocking the Power of Transformation. I'd love to know what inspired that book and what it's about.
Yeah, so actually that one hasn't been published yet. It's in the final stages right now. And it was going to be published in the spring, but then when the coronavirus came, I put everything on hold for Virtual School Assembly. So I delayed the publication of that book and have made some changes based on what we've gone through in this last little bit. But it's called Unlocking the Power of Transformation, is because I have experienced in my life a number of transformations, and they've been in some small areas and some big areas. The big one for me, of course, was losing 100 pounds and changing my health. And so I used that, as well as a few other examples from my own life, other stories and transformations from my own life, to distill a formula for how anyone can take something that they want to change in their life, and they can work actively towards that and see a transformation in their life. It's not your traditional goal-setting book where we go through SMART goals, that it needs to be specific and measurable and things like that. This is more of a big picture kind of thing. What are the kind of changes that in your life that will really elevate your life so that you're happier, so you're doing more good in the world and things like that? So I really go through, I have a 5-step formula where I walk people through what they can do to see that transformation, to see that change in their lives. So I'm excited about it. I'm putting the finishing touches on it now. I'm planning to publish it next month in July of 2020. So it's been a pleasure to write, partly because it's autobiographical, and so it's been therapeutic to kind of get my own experiences out there. But I also think there's a ton of value, so I'm excited to get it out to the world.
Well, be sure to let us know when it's out because we're looking forward to reading it. So talking about your books, I read your first book or one of your books, How to Get Free Stuff. And Getting Free Stuff, I think it might have been what it was titled. And I've actually now gotten some cool free stuff as a result. So tell me a little bit about that book.
Sure. Like I mentioned before, it was simply to answer the question, how am I getting free stuff? I started getting stuff because when we moved across the country and came here, I didn't have a job and we were struggling financially. And I was really nervous that my kids wouldn't have any presents for Christmas. And so I started thinking, what can I do? And I was desperate. My little brothers had been doing online reviews for a while, and they'd been trying to talk me into doing it. And I just didn't think it would be worth the effort. I didn't believe them. And so when I was finally desperate and wanting to get things for my kids, I reached out to my younger brother and said, okay, what do I do? I'm going to try this. I'm going to get started. And he walked me through the process of how to connect with different companies, how to grow your brand. And I had no brand. And so I started from scratch and I started getting followers on different social channels to the point where within a few months I had 50,000 followers. And then people started sending me stuff like crazy. And so after a while, I realized that I had learned a lot in the process that I could share with other people so they didn't have to make the same mistakes I made as far as growing a brand, getting things sent to you. And then the way I make money now, the best thing for me is I made video reviews on YouTube. And in the description, I have a link to the product. And when people follow my link, so if they see the review, decide they want to buy that thing, they can click on that link. It's called an affiliate link. And they can go buy it from Amazon. And when people do that, I make a very small commission. Well, it turns out that I haven't done any reviews in a few months now, but I'm still making 10, 20, 30, 40 bucks a month because people are buying things based on my old reviews. And so, I wanted to share that with people. So I wrote the book, self-published it, and I've made it available. Now when people ask me, how do you do it? I either give them a book because I have a few here at my house, or I send them the link so that they can get it themselves. And that's how it came about. It wasn't a difficult book to read or to write, just because it was just the things that I was doing. So I just take notes as I was doing those things, and it just came together pretty quickly. We're pleased to welcome back to the show Daniel Knudsen. Daniel is a filmmaker, a director, a storyteller, an actor. He represents Clear Creek Media out of Michigan, so not your typical place to be an actor and a director, but that's what he talks about in his episode, back in episode 21, was the storytelling process and breaking into Hollywood and doing that in a maybe non-conventional place as far as what you would expect with Hollywood actors. And so that's still one of the episodes my kids talk about, because one of the things that Daniel does in that episode is he goes back and he kind of goes through his storyboarding process for how to get a story mapped out, and kind of just shows us that process. And my kids loved that part. They're like, oh my gosh, that's so cool how he tells the story and he goes through the arc. And so we're still talking about that one, but grateful to have you back. This time not to be the guest, but to be the host. So let me hand you the virtual microphone, Daniel, and the show is yours.
Well, thank you. Well, we talk about doing things in a slightly non-conventional or non-traditional way. Tyler, I want to ask you some questions because I think you are a non-conventional teacher in certain respects, what you've been able to do with motivating your students. And I want to talk to you a little bit about yourself and something that you almost did that I've always wanted to do but have not done is give a TED Talk. I saw that you had a TED Talk all lined up and you were going to give it. And then what happened?
Yeah, so first, to get the TED Talk, I decided I wanted to do one because I had a story worth sharing. And, that's the whole thing for TED is ideas worth spreading. And my idea was that when we exercise, it actually triggers things in our brains and makes us better students. It helps us to learn better. So we should be doing more exercise at school because it makes us better students. And I was so excited to share that on a bigger stage. And so I had actually reached out to over 20 different TED organizations, some of the local ones that were doing TED events, and said, hey, is this a good fit for your event? I'd love to come in on my own dime, fly wherever you need me, and to give my TED Talk. And I had 3 different places that said, yeah, I think we're interested. The best fit was a high school in San Francisco. And it was a TED event that they'd been doing it for a number of years, and they'd never had outside speakers. It was traditionally just the students at the school that would give TED Talks. But they wanted to have me come in to be the last talk of the evening. So a bunch of students speaking and then a teacher to cap off the night. And so I was so excited. I'd made arrangements to go there. And in fact, it was on my spring break. So I intentionally found TED events around my spring break so I wouldn't have to take time off from teaching. And I arranged for other conferences on the way there. So I had been accepted to speak at a big teaching conference in Utah, and then I was going to fly out of Salt Lake to San Francisco. So while I was in Provo, Utah, presenting at this conference, the organizer called me up the day before I was to fly out, and he said, this COVID thing is taking over. San Francisco was one of the first cities hit by it, and he's like, we're going to cancel. First it was, we're going to go virtual, and if you want to record it and send it to us, we could maybe do that. And then the next day they called and said, no, we're just going to cancel it altogether. So I was totally prepared to go, and just sometimes that's how life goes. So I pivoted, and instead of giving my TED Talk there, I called up all the local schools while I was there in Utah Valley and said, hey, does anyone want to hear the TED Talk I was going to give? And 5 schools said, yeah, come on over. We'll make time for you. This will be great to have an impromptu assembly. And then the next day, 3 of them canceled because they're like, this is coming. It was all crazy happening so fast in the beginning there. But I did end up going and sharing it with 2 schools. And it was such a fun experience to be able to share my message, get some feedback from the students. In fact, at the second school I went to, when I was done, they're like, this message of getting more exercise is great. And this cute little 4th grader approached me to say thank you. And then she said, we're deciding that instead of going back to class, we're going to stay here in the gym and get some exercise. Do you want to stay and play dodgeball with us? And I stayed for another hour and just hung out with these 4th graders. It was so much fun. Actually, our next host on Virtual School Assembly today is Dr. C. Miller. She first appeared on episode 17 talking about leadership. And so you want to go back in the archives to watch that. She had some really great thoughts about how to be involved in leadership in high school and as you get older, but also how you can lead during times like the coronavirus and things like that. And so a really great episode with some real practical takeaways. So really appreciate you being on the show, Corey, and then coming back. So let me hand the microphone to you so you can be the host. And
I will take that from you right now.
There we go.
We had a really nice conversation about this idea of leadership, and it's so interesting with our lives, how we can look back into our childhoods and realize that so much of who we are today is shaped by who we were as kids and the things that we experienced as kids. And, you know, my passion and interest is really in leadership. And, you know, I want to turn it over to you and see what your thoughts are on what is maybe one of the biggest leadership lessons that you had as a kid, and not necessarily a formal lesson, but something that you just learned through experience that maybe has shaped the way that you see leadership and leading today.
Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate you asking. No one else has asked anything like that. But when I was a kid, I really wanted to be a leader, but I was shy, I was awkward, and I didn't have, you know, I wasn't the most popular kid or anything like that. So I remember, like, going back to high school, I ran for student government and lost. I tried a lot of things that unsuccessfully. And then even later on, I tried to be involved with different things as I got older. And the cool lesson for me was I felt like I wasn't being a leader, but we talked about this on your episode, that there were things that I was doing to lead. It just wasn't in a formal leadership role. And so, and you know, the funny thing about that is I even had formal leadership roles, but didn't even consider it leadership until I look back years later. Like, for example, when I was in graduate school, I helped form a student organization, and I was the first president of that organization. but I didn't run for it. I was appointed by the students. And so I didn't feel like I was this great leader. I was just falling into this thing that we were organizing. And, then later on as a professor, I created an academic journal and became the editor of that. So it was my creation. I wasn't appointed. I just decided to do it. And you can even say the same thing applies here with Virtual School Assembly, that I'm taking a leadership role as the host, but it's because I took initiative and decided to do something. And it's been a lot of work and a lot of hustle on my part. Wasn't appointed by my peers. I just decided there was a need and I could do something about it. So I would say that for me, the big lesson was that you don't have to be appointed to be a leader. You can find a need and do something about it. And that's how you can serve others. And we've had other people on the show talk about servant leadership. And certainly that's what I'm trying to do with my life is to give as much as I can, even if I'm not getting a lot of credit for that or it's not a real visible thing.
Wow. Tyler, if I was thinking of describing you in one statement, I would say that Tyler adds value to people's lives. You're an educator, you're a big inspirational speaker, you do all these things that are constantly helping people add value to their lives. So that is just terrific. Congratulations. But I hear that you, beyond just adding value to people's lives, you have added value to some physical properties. I hear that you refinished 2 basements. Tell me about that process with fixing up houses. What did you learn from that? How did you learn how to do that?
Right. So I answered that for someone else. I want to end though, because Daniel, I'm going to take your last question or your last statement that you add values to lives. I just want to comment on that really quickly.
Yeah.
One of the coolest things I've learned through this coronavirus and doing Virtual School Assembly is that if you have value that you can share with others, it's going to come back to you. And I want to talk about this with you, Daniel, because we met some time ago, and I can't even remember exactly how we met. It's something about Wikipedia. You had a page, and I was working on Wikipedia, and we shared ideas on how to get pages posted. And again, I can't remember exactly how that went down. But since that time, we've had a number of interactions where we've helped each other with different things we're working on. And it's amazing that when you give value to someone else, you don't need to expect them to give anything back to you, but that's usually what happens, right? And so it's been amazing working with you over the last 4 or 5 years, and at the same time being able to observe your career as an actor and as a director. And I've become, like a super fan. When you have a new movie come out, I'm always watching it, wanting to write reviews and things like that. And it's really cool. And I think that's an important lesson for kids during this time, that a lot of us feel like, well, there's not much that we can do. There's not much we can contribute. But that's not true. If we look to those around us, there's a lot we can do to add value, to reach out. And it works both ways. I mean, I've learned so much from you, Daniel, and I really appreciate your friendship and all that you've taught me over these years. So I'm grateful that you are here to ask these questions, because you're one of my favorite people, and it's cool to see how, what goes around comes around.
Well, thank you so much. The feeling is mutual, and I think you're absolutely right. When we add value to each other's lives, it winds up adding value to our own lives. Well, Tyler, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing.